big story at this hour, visuals coming in of the talks that have now begun between a Russian delegation and a Ukrainian delegation. These are the live visuals coming in right now. This is the meeting around which all eyes across the world are focused on right now, holding strong against the Russian invasion and retaining control over its major cities. Ukraine has started speaking to Russia on finding a way possible. Is that possible? Because Russia has said that it wants to reach an agreement with Ukraine, especially about Ukraine adopting a neutral status. The Ukraine presidency says it wants an immediate ceasefire and a withdrawal of Russian troops. Now, Ukraine agreed to hold talks with Russia at its border with Belarus near the Chernobyl exclusion zone after a call between the president, Vladimir Zelensky, and the Belarusian leader, Alexander Lukashenko. Now, the move comes in the backdrop of protests against Russia growing both within its borders and beyond them. Ukraine has agreed to these talks around the same time when the Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the country's defense chiefs to put nuclear deterrence forces on high alert. That was last evening. The US then slammed him for how Washington puts it, manufacturing threats that don't exist because his invasion of Ukraine has been halted. Meanwhile, even as these talks have begun, the United Nations Security Council will be holding a rare emergency special session of the General Assembly today to discuss Russia's attack on Ukraine. India, interestingly, abstained from the procedural vote, but India says that New Delhi welcomes the talks between Moscow and Kiev. Meanwhile, Russia's central bank has announced that it's raising its key interest rate to 20% from 9.5%. This is the West hit the country with sanctions over Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. The ruble has collapsed against the dollar and the euro on the Moscow Stock Exchange. Let's go across to Jyoti here. She joins us now. Jyoti, I want to first ask you for an update. I think you have Indian students with you, but before we get to that, because that, of course, is our big focus, I quickly just want to get an update from you about what you know about these talks that have begun between the Ukrainian delegation and the Russian delegation. Are there expectations from this meeting? I know it's not a really high-level meeting. It's not the president's, of course. It's the first step going forward. But what are the expectations, given both sides are coming to the table with strong demands and inflexible demands, it seems?
Well, exactly. The expectations, as we know, President Zelensky said that he was going into this with low expectations. I think on the Russian side, they're coming in with the upper hand, coming in with the expectation that since they've already invaded Ukraine, and the only thing, of course, they haven't taken over the major cities, but we also know that at the moment they've only got their light artillery and machinery here. The heavy stuff isn't actually here yet into Kyiv and into the major cities. So I think at this point, it's going to be hard for Ukraine to make all the demands it wants. It's going to be easier for Russia to make the demands it wants. And we already know some of the demands that it wants. It wants Ukraine to stay out of NATO. And as we just heard recently, the EU has said that they want Ukraine a part of the EU, and that Ukraine is a part of EU. And Zelensky has also responded and said, like, this seems to be quickening up that process for Ukraine to become a part of the EU. Whereas I think about a week ago, it was sort of something more far-fetched, something in a couple of that could be done in years later. But now that sort of the pace in that has changed. So both sides are going in there with totally different wants and needs. And for them to meet in the middle, it just, at this point, it seems to be something difficult. It's great that they're at the negotiation table and talking. Great for the people of Ukraine. That's the most important thing right now. They're the ones that are suffering on the ground. But we know with all of the talks, the rhetoric in the past week, 2 weeks, even the past few months, it's really going to be hard for them to come to any kind of agreement.
Can always hope, but even as you monitor that, Jyoti, on the ground, as you just touched upon this a little bit, is it's the people, as we put it in India, the Aam Aadmi, the regular folk who are struggling, who are facing hardships, and especially Indian students who are currently at border crossings near across the country, saying they're facing terrible conditions as it's snowing heavily, etc. What can you tell us about the condition of students? I think you have one with you, but what can you tell us about how these students are managing by themselves as preparations are underway, even by our government back home, to get them out?
Yeah, the key right there is by themselves. They're in a foreign country and trying to just figure things out. And even, if you are Ukrainian, I mean, it's difficult and terrible for everyone. But perhaps you have family and you have connections. You can, get some help from somewhere. But if you're a student here living in a hostel, at this point, it's hard. You don't really have anybody to rely on. Sure, you get your family, your parents calling you and, telling you they love you and all of that. But, here you need food, you need water, you need safety. And they've just been living underground in the past few days. And that alone, that can cause some real mental trauma that they're going to have to deal with once they get back to India. So it's a really tough situation even now, because they might leave here from Kiev to get to the border. But what's going to happen at the border, we don't know.